This is the Christian Circle podcast, and you're listening to Pamela Fernandez, where we have conversations about Christian living. Here's the show.
Hello, Charles, and welcome to another episode on our podcast. We've had you many times over, and we're glad to have you again. So tell us about this new saint that we're talking about today.
Talking about St. Teresa of Avila, or Avila, I've heard people pronounce it. Depends on if it's Jamaican or a different apologist. He pronounces things strange, so he throws me for a loop. But St. Teresa of Avila, and she is one of the few female doctors of the church. So when you're named a doctor of the church, that means you've taught teachings on the faith that are so important that really all the faithful should pay attention to you. Everyone should know something about what you have to teach. There's only, I think, on last count, I think there was like 20 doctors of the church. Mm-hmm. So, and I think only a handful of them are females, maybe 4 or 5. Yeah. So she's a very, very important saint. And, we all should know more about her, including myself, because like I told you in the pre-show, I really, I kind of heard about her, and I wanted to read some of her writings when I was an RCIA, but a few people in real life and on the internet told me, oh, no, that's too, that's postgraduate reading, basically. You're still in elementary school, as far as Catholicism goes. So maybe you leave her for a later time, and then, so maybe I'll start getting into her more now.
Yeah. We had a guest last week, Connie Rossini, who is writing a commentary on her life, and she describes her as the saint of contemplative prayer. But before we go into all that, tell us a little more about the life, the early life of this saint.
She was born in Avila, what is now Spain. By the time it was Castile, the Kingdom of Castile. And she was born in 1515. So if you know history, that was just a couple of years before Martin Luther decided to have his little party up in Germany. So she grew up. She grew up in kind of that tumultuous Reformation, Counter-Reformation. All that time Europe was being torn apart by all these things going on. Spain was kind of somewhat insulated from it. They didn't have as much going on in Spain as did like France, Germany, the Low Countries, England, all that kind of northwestern Europe. But there was still a lot of Protestant influence in Spain that had to be fought against. And, there was an Inquisition and everything. And Teresa ended up herself later in life being called in front of the Inquisition. So, she grew up in a very tumultuous time in what is now Spain. And she joined the Carmelite Order.
So her mother dies in 1529, and then she actually doesn't want to become a nun, is it?
Yeah, she was very drawn, from what I understand of her early life, like childhood. She was very devout and very religious, but then her mother dies, and I guess it was just kind of one of them things. They say when a parent dies, my experience is myself, I was a lot older than she was. My father died when I was 28 years old. And it either pushes you away from God or draws you closer to God.
Yes.
It's one of them things. It's like I've known people that have lost children that has completely destroyed them, or they've lost children and they basically like go on hyperspeed towards sanctity. So it's a lot of times it's one or the other, because it changes your life forever. And you can either allow it to shape you for the better, or it can destroy you, basically. And it didn't destroy her, but it kind of caused a separation, I guess you could say. Okay. And she didn't want to join the convent. She ended up joining it anyway, though, obviously. And she went on to join the Carmelites, and she didn't like what she was seeing in the Carmelites. She didn't like. There was a cloister rule in monastic orders where they're kind of kept apart, kept aside.
Yeah.
Cloistered means to be like set apart, set aside, and they weren't really obeying that rule. There was visitors so much every day. There was all kinds of visitors into the convent, and that it became like they were just living in the town with the people. So what is the point of saying we're cloistered if we're not really cloistered? You know, and that wasn't even one of the major problems. That was just one of the things that really got on her nerves and really bugged her. And so she decided to start her own religious order that was more of a strict observance, more of a back to the basics, more of the monastic fathers, like the desert fathers you read about in their early, like the fathers of monasticism. She kind of decided to go that way and reform the whole Carmelite order.
So was she successful? Because it says that she had many attempts and she failed in the beginning at doing this.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of resistance. You try to change anything, you know, there's going to be resistance. Think about in your own parish, if you've ever seen in your own parish, like they decide to change the style of the altar linen. And for some reason, there's going to be somebody that like decides this is the hill they're going to die on, you know, and like they'll go to war for them altar linens. You know, there's people that resist change, whether good, bad, or indifferent, just, I don't know why, but just to resist it. Like I myself, I don't like change too much. I like things the way they are. I like, my dad used to always call me, have you ever seen that movie Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid? When they went to rob the one bank, and he said, "Where's the old bank? I like the old bank." You know, like just you like things the way they are. I'm somewhat reluctant to change, but if it's a change for the better, I'll go along with it. I'll at least hear it out, the reasons for it. There's some people though that will not change whatsoever, and so she tried reforming this order that had been around for, you know, the Carmelites had been around for, I want to say going on 400 or 500 years at this point, right? They're one of the older orders in Catholicism, and so she comes around in the early 16th century, and they're like, "Who are you that you're going to tell us?" You know, and it's also that kind of thing, like you're new here. Well, I get this sometimes as a convert to Catholicism. I've actually had people tell me, "Well, what do you think? You know everything? You know, I've been a Catholic for 55 years." And I usually say, "Well, then you should know better." You know, when they tell me things like that, like, I don't know everything. No, obviously I don't know everything. I'm a human. But I've only been at this for a few years, and I'll tell you that. Yeah, I've been a Catholic for 3 years. But, you know, if you've been a Catholic for 55 years, I tell you that the Eucharist is the real presence of Christ, and you dispute me on that, that doesn't mean that you're right just because you've been around for so long. That means you should have known this years ago. You know? So she comes along, and she's trying to reform things, and really, with hindsight, and we're outsiders, you know, we're not Carmelites, so we don't have, I'm not a Carmelite, so I don't have a dog in the fight. And so from the outside, we look at it and say, like, well, she was right. She wanted to reinforce the rule about cloistering. She wanted to get rid of kind of the egotism that was going on around there. She wanted to get rid of owning property, you know, like where you give up everything to join the order. She wanted to really kind of enforce that. And so everything was community. And you're choosing to join this community, so join it and do the rules the way they're supposed to be. And she just got a lot of pushback from that until she had a couple of, I believe it was either the provincial, the province for that order, or the vice provincial. He kind of went to bat for her. And so then things died down. She started being able to implement some of these reforms.
And following this, like she was admired by King Philip. She was admired by a lot of people. And what I've read about her is that she was a very charismatic person. Someone like St. Ignatius of Loyola, where they were well-spoken and very charming people. But then you read about the fact that she was a contemplative, and it's the exact opposite of what she was. So what is the theory of this contemplative life that she kind of brought into existence, and what did she write about it?
Most famous for her book, The Interior Castle. And like I was saying earlier, I went to read this book. It's considered like one of the greatest works of Christian literature, you know. And I went to read it when I was in RCIA, and I was asking online, like, what's some good books to read? And, you know, people will tell you everyone's an expert online, so I was getting all these recommendations from all these people with their Facebook doctorates. And I got told that the interior castle was, postgraduate level reading, and I was on kind of more of an elementary school level because I was an RCIA, so I was getting ahead of myself basically, and don't bother, and it's going to go over your head. So it kind of scared me away from it, because basically I was told it's too heavy for you, you're not going to get it.
Mm-hmm.
And now, the last couple of weeks I've been actually kind of taking a little bit of the time and reading some of it, and really, I wish I had read it years ago. I wish I had read the whole thing years ago and then went over it again more recently, because it really is, and I haven't read the whole thing, I haven't even read part of it, but just the little bits that I have read really are filled with so much rich for good reason. And so she wrote Interior Castle on her contemplative life, right? So she said that she imagined the soul, the human soul, was this clear, I think she called it a diamond. And there's 7 mansions, or 7 chambers or rooms, or it's translated as mansions. And she said, she made a reference to, I believe it's Matthew, Jesus said, "In my Father's house are many mansions." So each basically is a detachment. Each room, as you progress further and further into your soul, this castle, right? So you're supposed to be strong and withstand the attacks of the devil. And as you venture deeper and deeper into the castle, you become more and more detached from worldly things, from sin and vice, and more attached to what should be at the center of the castle, that is God himself. So as deeper in, you get more detached, and each room shuts off more of the outside world. Kind of like if you look at old Gothic cathedrals, inside, from the outside, the stained glass just looks like glass. Like if you look at Notre Dame before the fire, if you look at the outside, it just looked like, it didn't look any different than regular glass. But inside, it was beautiful, bright colors, or on the outside of them, Gothic churches had gargoyles and grotesques and all these, to show that the outside of the church is evil and worldly. Not that matter is evil, like Gnosticism, but the devil and the world and the flesh is outside. But once you enter into the church, then inside is beauty and light and goodness, and so that was what her teachings was in the spiritual life, from outside the castle completely, to the first room, the second room, the third room, and then each one is, by the grace of God, you're being pulled further and further in to the interior castle, to your interior contemplative life of gazing upon Christ.
And so how does, we did this last week where we talked about how we become contemplatives, and it's a lifelong experience. But for ordinary people, how is it that, or what is it that we can learn from St. Teresa, and especially her work on contemplative prayer, which is difficult and depends on each person's journey wherever they are. So how does one go about emulating her?
Admittedly, I speak Catholic with a Protestant accent. So I still I get confused all the time between contemplative and meditative, because to me, just right off the bat, if you said what's the difference between contemplating and meditating, I'd say there is no difference. It's the same thing. But in the life of prayer, according to the church, it is a difference.
Yeah.
So it's been a prayer has been a long learning for me personally. When I was, I don't know if I ever told you this before, when I was an RCIA, I think it was Bill, said, "Do you pray?" to everyone, not to me in particular, but said, "Do you pray?" to everyone. And everyone was like, "Yeah, I here and there." And I got thinking about it. Like, I said yes. I was a Christian. I had been a Christian my whole life. I pray. But when I started thinking about it, I didn't really have a life of prayer, Set aside time for prayer. I didn't have a set style of prayer. I didn't have a rhythm of prayer. I didn't have anything really. I just, sometimes I would say grace before a meal if it looked kind of like a dicey restaurant. If the restaurant was dodgy, I didn't want to get food poisoning, so I'd say grace before a meal. Like, that would remind me, just a regular, everyday, run-of-the-mill restaurant, But if I went in somewhere like, oh man, this place definitely, the cook didn't wash his hands, I'm going to say a prayer. I would say a prayer, if I was driving down the road and it started snowing, like, oh man, I better pray right now. Dear Jesus, get me home safe. So things like that. But did I really, no, it wasn't a prayer. I wasn't in a prayerful relationship with God. And then he continued in RCIA and said, if you're not praying, how are you relating with God? Like, God is, God's standing here, stays standing here right beside you, and you're refusing to have a conversation with him. You're looking at your phone, you're watching a movie, you're doing whatever. What kind of relationship is that? And then secondly, he said, St. Augustine said that a Christian without prayer is like a bird without wings. So, wings, it's a pretty useless creature. And a Christian without prayer is the same way. So I started kind of getting in that regular habit of praying at that point. And I didn't even know then that there's 3 types of prayer. There's vocal prayer, which is what you think of when you say like grace before meals or thanking God for things, or it's kind of more of like a conversation. Then there's meditative prayer, and that is like if you're studying scripture, you're praying with scripture, Lectio Divina, things like that, or even singing, I guess, could be meditative. I don't know if that would be vocal or meditative. Probably a combo of the two.
Yeah.
And then contemplative prayer is when you just kind of, St. Teresa explained it as a loving gaze.
Yeah.
So that ever be with a friend, and you go out with a friend, and you go wherever, and you just kind of sit there, and you ever go visit someone in the hospital, and you don't have to say anything to them, you don't have to read a book to them, you can just kind of be there. It's really at the essence of the soul, from my personal understanding. Like I said, it's Catholicism with my background in Protestantism. So this is my personal understanding of contemplative prayer. Where I'm at personally with it is, we're obviously the patient, and God's visiting us in the hospital, and he's just sitting there holding our hand. And that's contemplative prayer. So how to do contemplative prayer is a whole different, there's Eucharistic adoration, I think, would probably be my favorite form of it. Just going in, because when I first started doing Eucharistic adoration too, I didn't even know that was a thing until I think it was after RCI. I had never even heard of it before. And so of all the things I studied and learned about Catholicism, read about, I'd never even heard of Eucharistic adoration until a friend of mine said, are you doing adoration? And I was like, what's that? And so he explained it to me, and I went and I found out that not only did my church have adoration, but had it a lot. And now they've got a whole adoration chapel and everything. And I would go and say, like, well, what am I supposed to do? That was the question, is what do I do while I'm here? Do I do this? Do I do that? And someone said, just go and sit and be with Jesus. And so I have you heard, when I go into Eucharistic adoration, there's the monstrance, there's our Lord on the altar. I want to do something, so I'll read a few scriptures, or I'll say some prayers, but then I always end up just sitting there for however long, and just kind of, like Teresa said, just kind of just sitting there. Presence, and that's what contemplative prayer, being present.
So, would you suggest that people should go on and read? Because Connie Rossini was saying, it's a very difficult book, but I think at some point we all need to be reading this. So, would you say you should start reading The Interior Castle?
Yeah, definitely. I'm gonna try to tackle it myself. But yeah, definitely. It's like, a lot of people shy away from a lot of the spiritual classics because they think it's too difficult. But it's not too difficult. It's there for us, and it's if we don't try, how are we gonna ever? How are we gonna ever? Like, oh, that's too difficult. I'll wait until I'm more spiritually mature until I read, City of God, or Imitation of Christ, or The Interior Castle, or whatever. Well, you're just going to be waiting forever, because we're never going to be perfect here on earth. That's what, we get perfected in heaven. We're perfect in heaven. Here on earth, we're all going to be flawed human beings. limited understanding. So you just got to do the best you can. And I don't think it's beyond the comprehension of anyone, really. I think if you're willing to read it and you're willing to pray beforehand, read it, have that part of your meditative prayer, reading this book, and then just sit there and ask God, ask the Holy Spirit to just kind of reveal to you what it is you need to learn from this book, and you'll get it.
And we could have made this episode far more complicated, but that's the reason why we've stuck with very simple questions, because I don't want people to shy away or be afraid of St. Teresa, because her work is difficult. And I don't think it is. It just depends on how you look at it and where you are on your spiritual journey. So it's open to interpretation wherever you are.
Right.
I know that she had some struggles personally in terms of prayer. In terms of with simplicity, with ego, with all these. So do you have anything on that as far as overcoming those worldly struggles and attaining simplicity and selflessness?
Yeah, I actually heard overcoming worldly struggles. That's what I need to overcome myself. I struggle with all kinds of different things, so I find myself confessing the same things over and over again. It seems like. And Scott Hahn said the one time he was frustrated, and he told his priest that he was tired of confessing the same sins over and over again. And the priest said, "Well, you don't want new sins to confess, like, yeah, but at least you're confessing, and at least you know what I mean. You're being convicted of it, and you're thinking, I need to go to confession, so you're on the right path. Overcoming worldly struggles, you got to do the opposite, basically. If you have a hard time with unforgiveness, you have to go out of your way to purposely be merciful towards people. If you have I think, was it Aquinas or Augustine that said, I think it was Aquinas, for every vice there's a virtue, so you got to find the alternate virtue for that vice that you're struggling with, and practice that. Put that into practice. So practice mercy. Practice all these different things that are the opposite of the vice you have.
I have no more questions because there's a lot of her work on contemplative prayer, but I just don't know what to ask. So
where do you begin?
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah.
Yeah. It's really. That's why I said she's difficult to explain, but not difficult to understand, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And it's very individual based.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Each person gets something different out of it.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Okay, let me ask you, any last thoughts on Saint Teresa?
I think we need to set aside specific time and place for prayer every day. I like to either very late at night, because I've got 3 kids and it's just crazy in the house and I don't get a minute to think, but late at night, like around midnight, everyone's asleep, I'm the only person awake, and then I can have time to pray and do some spiritual reading and stuff like that. My wife, she's the exact opposite. She wakes up an hour before she gets the kids up for school, and it's quiet, and she reads her Bible and she reads a devotional and she prays. So that's her time. You got to find your own personal time. It might be middle of the day during your lunch break. It might be at night. It might be in the morning, whatever. And you need to set aside a specific, start with 5 minutes and crank it up from there. But if you don't start, you'll never, you can say, like, I don't have time to pray an hour a day. Well, no, especially since you're not praying at all.
Yeah.
Start with 30 seconds, saying Our Father, and take it from there and just kind of build upon that. You gotta set aside time. And then I was listening to Bishop Barron, and I think it was Bishop Barron. It was either Bishop Barron or Full Machine. I can't remember. It was a clip, and he was talking about when you're praying and you have distractions, right? And you try to shun and shoo away the distractions. They've already won.
Yeah.
Just keep praying. Don't try to, when you get something coming to your mind, you're like, oh no, you try to force it out of your mind. No, don't even do that. Just don't even entertain it at all. because the devil, the world, and the flesh, the three enemies of the Christian life, is going to try to interfere. Anytime you try to set aside time for God, you'd be surprised, like nobody's awake at midnight and I'm going to be praying. My son will wake up for no reason and start screaming that he wants juice. My toddler. I'm like, why are you awake? You just went to sleep a couple hours ago. So it will, there's going to be distractions. There will be a fire truck parked right outside your house. There's going to be different things. You just got to just keep on going. Keep rolling. Don't even stop to entertain the distraction, because then the distraction's already won.
My mother had this idea. I mean, her idea of contemplative prayer is a bit different. And of late, she's understood this as taking the Lord with you everywhere you go, So her idea of contemplative prayer is taking the biblical verse where you pray without ceasing, but instead of that, you contemplate Jesus with you all the time. Like he's sitting with you on the bus, taking him to work with you.
Right.
And that's a different idea, because I realized that when you feel him close to you, your behavior changes, the words coming out of your mouth changes, because you're constantly thinking, oh, he's watching me. So that's her idea of contemplative prayer, and I think everybody has a different definition for this.
And also, too, you got to be careful, too, with the modern, there's kind of this modernist idea of contemplation, where you kind of like transcendental meditation, yeah. Where you just empty yourself out, and it's just a complete emptying of self, and emptying where there's absolute nothingness. The point of Christian prayer, whether vocal prayer, meditative prayer, or contemplative prayer, is focusing on what should be the center of your life, and that is Christ.
Yeah.
So you're supposed to meditate, and like your mother said, take him with you, because Jesus is with you at all times. So just recognize the fact that he's there,
Yeah.
And I think that's a great idea. And it just, when you do, like when you're meditating, if you're doing meditative prayer and you're reading scripture and you're doing Lectio Divina, you're not emptying yourself out. That type of meditation isn't Christian. That's New Age mumbo jumbo. Don't do that. If anyone does, like centering prayer, centering prayer on yourself, you're not supposed to center on yourself. You're supposed to center on the center of the universe, Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
So that's supposed to be your center. Find your center. If he's your center, that's fine. But if your center is self or emptiness, it's not fine. That's not what we're talking about.
Okay. So, Charles, you have a book, and one of our listeners, Melissa, I think, she won one of your books. And yes, and so tell people where they can find your books. Tell people where they can find out more about you. You're very active on Facebook and Twitter. So we see you a lot there. So tell people all about that.
Yeah, my website is nowthatimcatholic.com, and I wrote a book last year, and it's called The Beauty of the Mass, Exploring the Central Act of Catholic Worship. And it's kind of a step-by-step exploratory look at the Mass and all the words and actions and the motions of the priest and the people, and what they mean to us, the faithful, and how we can see deeper meanings in it, and how all of it points to Christ, like I said. And that's available on Amazon as a paperback and an ebook, and hopefully in the future we'll have it as an audiobook too.
Are you going to be reading it?
Yeah, I'm kind of looking in there right now and setting up my account. I don't know. I'm gonna probably read it myself, but I gotta see. I'm gonna record maybe a first chapter and see how it sounds.
Well, you're probably used to it by now, since you've been doing podcasting, public speaking, and the whole lot.
Yeah, it's not fiction too, so I don't have to put any inflection in my voice. So there's no voice acting; it's just reading, so it should be fine.
Yeah.
I don't think I could do fiction.
And what about Facebook and Twitter?
Yeah, on Facebook, it's facebook.com/CatholicConvert2016, and which obviously was the year I entered the church. And then on Twitter, I'm at Now That I'm Catholic. Just Now That I'm Catholic on Twitter.
Okay, all right. So thank you, Charles, for today, and hopefully we will have you sooner for the next saint.
Sounds good. I look forward to it. Thanks for having me.